The city glittered below, a sprawling constellation of 1,000 lesser stars. But from the 42nd floor of the Vance Industries Tower, it was just a silent, indifferent pattern. Eleanor Vance stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette framed by the cold geometry of her success. The corner office was a testament to her reign. Minimalist, sterile, a museum of achievement where nothing felt truly alive. Not the chrome and glass desk, not the abstract art on the walls, and certainly not the desiccated orchid on the windowsill, its petals brittle and brown. It had been a gift from a man she once trusted, and now she kept it as a reminder. Trust, like orchids, was a fragile thing that withered under neglect. Loneliness was a constant, low hum in the architecture of her life, the price she paid for the view. A soft knock, barely audible, broke the quiet. "Ms. Vance." Eleanor turned. A man stood in the doorway, his janitorial cart parked discreetly beside him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a kind, weary face that didn't belong in the sharp-edged world of corporate finance. Beside him, holding his hand, was a small girl with wide, curious eyes and 2 bright pink bows in her hair. "I'm sorry to disturb you," the man said, his voice a gentle baritone. "My daughter, Maya. Her sitter had an emergency and I couldn't... Well, I had to bring her. We'll be quiet." Eleanor's first instinct was a flash of irritation. This was her sanctuary, the one place where the world's messy, unpredictable emotions couldn't reach her. But then the little girl, Maya, stepped forward, her gaze fixed not on Eleanor, but on the dead orchid. "It's sad," the girl whispered, her voice a tiny bell. Eleanor blinked, taken aback. She looked from the child to the man, whose expression was one of quiet apology. "It's just a plant. Everything needs care," the little girl said simply, as if stating an immutable law of the universe. The man, Samuel, she recalled from his name badge, gave a small, apologetic smile. "She loves plants. I'm sorry, Ms. Vance. We'll get out of your way." He started to gently pull his daughter back, but Eleanor found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "No, wait." The words felt foreign on her tongue. "What does it need?" she asked, gesturing to the pathetic plant. Samuel hesitated, then stepped closer, his presence warm and solid in the sterile room. He examined the orchid with a practiced eye. "It's thirsty, for one, and the roots are probably choked. It needs a new pot, more light, but not direct sun. And patience." He looked at her, his eyes holding a depth of understanding that was both unnerving and strangely comforting. "They're resilient. You'd be surprised what can be saved with a little attention." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken meaning. It wasn't just about the flower. They both knew it. That night, for the first time in years, Eleanor Vance left her office feeling not just the weight of her isolation, but the faint, terrifying glimmer of a question. What if something could still be saved? A week later, Eleanor found herself working late again, a habit she couldn't seem to break. The numbers on her screen blurred into meaningless squiggles. She was thinking about choked roots and the need for patience. As if summoned by her thoughts, Samuel appeared at her door, this time alone. "Evening, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice as calm as ever. He began his work, moving with an efficient grace, the quiet swish of his mop a soothing rhythm in the cavernous silence. Eleanor swiveled in her chair. "Your daughter, Maya, is she all right?" A smile touched his lips, transforming his tired face. "She's with her grandmother tonight. Thank you for asking. She's a good kid. A little too honest for her own good sometimes." "She was right about the orchid," Eleanor admitted, her voice softer than she intended. She had followed his instructions, repotting the plant in fresh soil and moving it to a spot with gentle morning light. It still looked bleak, but she hadn't thrown it out. Samuel paused his work, leaning on his mop handle. It just needed someone to see it was struggling. He looked around the vast, impersonal office. A lot of things in this building probably do. There was no judgment in his tone, only observation. It made Eleanor want to talk, to fill the silence with something other than the hum of the servers. "Do you like working here?" she asked, the question sounding clumsy and invasive. He considered it for a moment. It's quiet. It's steady. That's what Maya and I need right now. Quiet and steady. He didn't elaborate, but the weight of the unspoken hung in the air. This was a man who had known the opposite. I brought you something, he said, changing the subject. He reached into his cart and pulled out a small, foil-wrapped package. My mom's recipe for sweet potato pie. Figured you might be hungry, working so late. Eleanor stared at the offering. No one had brought her food, a simple, home-cooked gesture of care, since she couldn't remember when. Her life was catered meetings and solitary takeout containers. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said with a simple nod. But Maya said you looked like you needed some sweetness in your life. Like I said, too honest. He placed the pie on the corner of her desk, a warm, fragrant intrusion into her sterile world, and then quietly resumed his work. Eleanor ate the pie alone in her glass tower, and it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. It tasted of warmth, of home, of a life she couldn't imagine. It tasted of connection. And as she ate, she felt a crack form in the icy wall she had built around her heart. Their late-night conversations became a quiet ritual. He would work, she would pretend to, and they would talk. She learned that Maya had been very sick as a toddler, a frightening battle with a respiratory virus that had left her lungs permanently delicate. Samuel had been a promising architectural draftsman, but the inflexible hours and high-stress environment were impossible to manage with Maya's frequent doctor visits and health scares. He'd given it up without a second thought. She's my world, Miss Vance, he explained one night, his voice thick with a father's fierce, unconditional love. He was polishing the base of her large conference table, his reflection moving alongside hers. A career is just a way to pay the bills. A child, that's a reason to live. The janitorial work, the night shift, it lets me be there for her every morning, every afternoon. No missed school plays, no frantic calls to a boss who doesn't understand. It's a trade I'd make 1,000 times over. Eleanor listened, mesmerized. His sacrifice was so profound, so selfless. It stood in stark contrast to her own world, a world dominated by Marcus Thorne. Marcus had been her partner in business and in life. They had built this company together from the ground up. He was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. She had mistaken his ambition for passion, his possessiveness for love. The betrayal, when it came, was surgical. He had tried to force her out, orchestrating a smear campaign among the board members, claiming she was too emotional, too unstable to lead. He'd used their shared secrets, their pillow talk, as weapons against her. She had won the battle for the company, but the war had cost her everything. Her trust in others, her faith in herself. It had left her isolated on the throne he'd tried to steal. I understand making sacrifices, she heard herself say, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. Sometimes you give up parts of yourself to protect what you've built. Samuel stopped polishing and looked at her, truly looked at her. But what if the thing you built is a cage? What's the point of protecting it if you're trapped inside? His question struck her with the force of a physical blow. He saw her. He saw the gilded cage she inhabited every single day. The vulnerability of being so clearly understood was terrifying, yet exhilarating. As the weeks turned into a month, their bond deepened. Eleanor found herself looking forward to the quiet hum of his cart in the hallway. She brought a small, colorful watering can for the orchid, which, against all odds, had sprouted a tiny green shoot. One Friday, driven by an impulse she didn't understand, she asked if she could see his workshop. He'd mentioned offhandedly that he repaired old clocks and furniture in his spare time. His apartment was small and humble, but it was filled with a warmth that her sprawling penthouse lacked. It smelled of lemon polish and baking bread. Tools were arranged with meticulous care on a workbench in the corner of the living room. Intricate clockworks lay in various states of repair. And everywhere, there were Maya's crayon drawings, taped to the walls like priceless masterpieces. Maya, seeing Eleanor, ran to her and hugged her legs. The plant lady is here, she squealed. Eleanor's heart clenched. She awkwardly patted the girl's head, unused to such open, uncomplicated affection. Samuel watched them, a gentle smile on his face. "Welcome to our little corner of the world, Miss Vance. Please," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Call me Eleanor." That afternoon, she watched him work, his large, gentle hands expertly coaxing a broken grandfather clock back to life. He explained the delicate balance of the gears, the patience required to find the source of the problem, the satisfaction of hearing the first, hesitant tick-tock of a restored heartbeat. "Everything broken can be fixed," he said, not looking at her. But she knew he was speaking of more than just clocks. It just needs a steady hand, and someone who believes it's worth saving. Just as Eleanor felt the ice around her finally beginning to melt, the ghost of her past returned with a vengeance. Marcus Thorne, who had been lying in wait since his failed coup, made his move. He initiated a hostile takeover bid, backed by a rival conglomerate. His strategy was vicious and personal. He began leaking fabricated documents to financial journalists, hinting at a massive accounting fraud, with all arrows pointing directly at Eleanor. The narrative was the same one he'd used before. Eleanor was unstable, reckless, a liability. The company's stock began to plummet. The boardroom became a war zone. The air was thick with panic and accusation. Board members who had once sworn loyalty now looked at her with suspicion. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling, and the loneliness was more acute than ever. She worked feverishly, day and night, her lawyers and accountants scrambling to disprove the allegations. But Marcus was clever. The forgeries were sophisticated, designed to create maximum chaos and doubt. One night, she sat alone in the conference room after a brutal, day-long meeting, the city lights mocking her with their detached beauty. She was losing. The company she had bled for was being ripped from her grasp by the one man she had ever truly loved. The weight of it all was crushing her. Samuel entered the room, his cart gliding silently over the plush carpet. He didn't speak, just began to methodically clean the room, his calm presence a small anchor in her swirling storm of despair. He emptied the trash bins, and as he lifted the liner from the one near the head of the table where her most vocal opponent, a man named Sterling, had been sitting, a small flash drive clattered to the floor. Samuel picked it up, his brow furrowed. He looked at Eleanor, then at the drive. "This isn't yours, is it?" Eleanor shook her head, her mind too numb to process the small detail. "Probably just trash." But Samuel's expression was serious. He held it out to her. "Maybe, but in my experience, people don't accidentally throw away their keys." His words, a simple analogy, cut through her fog. She took the drive and plugged it into her laptop. It was a Trojan horse. Buried within a folder of innocuous corporate reports was a keylogger program, set to activate and transmit data. Sterling, one of her oldest board members, was feeding information directly to Marcus. The betrayal was deeper and more insidious than she had imagined. The discovery, however, was not the checkmate she needed. It was proof of a conspiracy, but it didn't disprove the fabricated financial data Marcus was using to poison the well. She was still on the defensive, still drowning. The crisis peaked a few nights later. Eleanor was in her office, staring at the latest catastrophic stock report, when Samuel knocked on her open door. His face was grim. "Eleanor," he said, forgoing any honorific. "I need to tell you something. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I swear. I was cleaning the executive lounge. I thought it was empty." He recounted what he had heard. It was Marcus Thorne, speaking on the phone, arrogant and triumphant. Samuel hadn't caught the whole conversation, but he'd heard the most critical parts. Marcus had bragged about a final kill shot, a digitally altered audio file of a phone call where Eleanor supposedly authorized an illegal offshore transfer. He'd named the sound engineer he'd hired to create it and mentioned that the original, unaltered file was stored on a private server, codenamed Icarus. He had laughed, saying the beauty of it was that the original harmless call was real, making the doctored version nearly impossible to disprove without it. He said he was releasing it to the press in the morning, Samuel finished, his eyes filled with a pained urgency. Just before the emergency board meeting. Here it was, the final desperate moment. Eleanor felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. But mingled with the fear was a strange sense of clarity. Samuel stood before her, not as a janitor, but as an ally. He had come to her with this information, a weapon that could be used for leverage, for blackmail, for his own gain. But there was no calculation in his eyes, only concern. He was offering her the truth, a simple, unvarnished gift. In that moment, she had a choice. She could use this information to play Marcus's game, blackmail him, threaten him, descend into the muck with him. The old Eleanor, the one who built this company on ruthless efficiency and guarded distrust, would have. It would have been vengeance, swift and satisfying. But as she looked at Samuel, she thought of his quiet integrity, of his hands gently fixing a broken clock, of his daughter's simple wisdom that everything needs care. She thought of the green shoot on her orchid. Vengeance wouldn't heal her. It would only reinforce the bars of her cage. "Thank you, Samuel," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you for trusting me." She didn't call a lawyer to draft a threat. She didn't call a private investigator to dig up dirt on Marcus. She picked up the phone and scheduled a press conference for 1 hour before the board meeting. Then she turned to Samuel. "Will you stand with me?" she asked. Not as an employee, but as a friend. He simply nodded. "Always." The next morning, Eleanor Vance walked into a room swarming with reporters, the air crackling with tension. Marcus was there, in the front row, a smug, predatory smile on his face. He expected her to resign in disgrace. Samuel stood quietly at the back of the room, a silent pillar of support. Eleanor didn't flinch. She walked to the podium and, with unwavering calm, laid out the truth. She didn't sling mud or make wild accusations. She simply stated the facts of the hostile takeover, the corporate espionage, and the flash drive found by a vigilant member of her staff. Then she addressed the final, damning piece of evidence. "I have been made aware," she said, her eyes finding Marcus's in the crowd, "that a fabricated audio recording will soon be released, purporting to show me committing financial fraud. I am also aware that this recording was created by altering a legitimate conversation, and that the original, unaltered file is stored on a private server codenamed Icarus." A gasp went through the room. Marcus's face went white. He had been so sure of himself, so certain of his secrecy, that he had been caught completely off guard. By revealing his method before he could deploy it, she had defanged him. She hadn't needed to produce the original file. She had simply exposed the magic trick before the magician could perform it. The lie, once its mechanics were laid bare, lost all its power. She concluded her statement by calling for a full, independent investigation into Marcus Thorne and his backers. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Marcus's takeover bid imploded. The board, faced with irrefutable evidence of his conspiracy, gave Eleanor their unanimous, resounding support. Sterling was dismissed in disgrace. Marcus Thorne was ruined, not by a bitter act of revenge, but by the clean, simple weight of the truth. That evening, Eleanor didn't stay late at the office. She went home. As she was leaving, she saw Samuel waiting for her by the elevators. "You were incredible," he said, his admiration shining in his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, the words wholly inadequate to express the depth of her gratitude. "You saved my company. You saved me." He just smiled. "I just helped you remember how to save yourself." He hesitated, then reached out and gently took her hand. His touch was warm and steady. "Eleanor, would you and your orchid like to come over for dinner? Maya is making her world-famous macaroni and cheese art." Eleanor's answering smile was the first truly joyful, unguarded smile she had worn in years. It felt like sunshine breaking through a long, cold winter. "I would love that more than anything." 1 year later, the corner office on the 42nd floor looked different. It was still a place of power, but it was no longer sterile. Maya's colorful drawings were taped to the filing cabinets. On the windowsill, the orchid was in full, glorious bloom. its vibrant purple flowers a defiant testament to its resilience. The Vance Industries Tower was thriving under Eleanor's renewed leadership, now infused with a sense of compassion and integrity that had been absent before. She'd implemented new family leave policies and a scholarship program for employees' children, changes inspired by a certain wise janitor. Samuel no longer worked the night shift. Eleanor had discovered his old architectural drafts and, stunned by their brilliance, had created a position for him in the company's design and development division. He was leading a new project to design affordable, beautiful community housing, a job that filled him with purpose. He was home every night for dinner. This evening, Eleanor packed her briefcase, her eyes lingering on the blooming orchid. Samuel and Maya walked in, their arrival filling the room with an easy, happy energy. Maya ran to the window. "See?" she said, pointing to the flower. "I told you it wasn't sad anymore." Samuel came up behind Eleanor, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood together, looking out at the city lights. It was the same view, but the feeling was entirely different. It was no longer a lonely vista from a gilded cage. It was a shared horizon, full of promise. "Ready to go home?" he murmured in her ear. Eleanor leaned back against him, her heart full. She had learned that true strength wasn't about building walls to keep the world out, but about having the courage to let the right people in. A broken company, a broken heart, a broken life. None of it was beyond repair. It just needed a steady hand, a little bit of light, and someone who believed it was worth saving. "Yes," she whispered, turning to kiss him. "Let's go home."